Nearly 100 people painted this scene on one of my recent workshops. How do they get on? Which ones do you like and why? Hello, I'm Tim Wilmot, a watercolor painter and tutor. I organise regular online watercolor workshops, and this is a compilation of attendee paintings from my October 2021 online workshop. So most months, watercolor enthusiasts from all over the world join me for a couple of hours paint-along experience where I do a step-by-step demo and answer your questions along the way. And in October 2021, we painted this scene based on the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. What attracted me to the scene? Well, it's a lovely valley in Morocco. Lots of warms and cools. Look at the color of those distant mountains, those gorgeous sort of reds in there, ochre reds, and then coming towards us, these vibrant greens with the fields and the pattern as well, the pattern of these hedges, the edges of those fields, I thought was quite an attractive pattern on that left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we've got a couple of hilltop villages. So there's a tiny bit of light catching the edges of those buildings and castles, a range of values as well, lovely darks on this side of the cliff, on this right-hand village, and the contrast with the light hitting some of those trees as well, light coming from the left. And also trying to get a feeling of depth in the painting with those distant mountains. As I say, they are red. We don't want to make them too red, too vibrant. Otherwise, of course, from a painting point of view, that's going to bring them too far forwards. We want to try and push them back with those values. So good exercise all round in composition and color mixing, getting those greens right. The composition of the scene as well, trying to get in the lights and darks, get that feeling of light coming in from the left-hand side. So on these workshops, you don't need to paint in my particular style. It's really interesting to see everyone's different interpretation of the same scene. And the workshops that I run, they're open to painters of all levels. So in this critique, you'll see painters at all different levels and beginners, advanced, everyone's welcome. So I'm going to show you the attendee paintings one by one in alphabetical order, give you a short critique on each one. Please, what I say is just my own opinion, of course. With art, one person may really like a painting, a scene, another person may not like it. So what I'm looking for in each painting is, as I say, the composition, drawing skills, watercolor techniques, and sticking to the brief. Now also, the photographs that I show you of attendee paintings are photographs taken by the attendees themselves. So everyone's got different cameras, phones to take their pictures, different lighting conditions. So the actual photograph may not be a true representation of the real live painting. So just bear that in mind as we go through. And then maybe some different sizes of paintings as well. Now, if you want to take part in these paintings, you can see all of my events on my event website, which is crowdcast.io/Tim Wilmot, TIMWILMOT. The next workshop is going to be on December the 11th, 2021. Something totally different. I'll cover that towards the end, what that will be. So let's get through them. First up is my effort on the day of the scene, and I'm fairly happy with it. We've got trying to push back those mountains in the distance with the valley of those mountains, not trying to make them too red, particularly on the left-hand side. The left-hand side, that area of the distant hills were a little bit further away from us, coming towards us, the right-hand side a little bit closer, left-hand side closer still, and then transitioning from that red color into these fields along the bottom of the valley, starting with a fairly light green and then becoming a little bit more intense as we come towards us. Playing on those contrasts with the dark shadow of the cliffs leading up to the hilltop villages and the contrast against a little bit of light hitting some trees there, just on the edge or the bottom edge of that hill, and different watercolor techniques. A little bit of wet in wet. Up here with the shadows in that distant hedgerow, very cool green on that distant hedgerow, and then some dry brush marks as well, just to show different types of vegetation and textures in the painting, and a little bit of red creeping into the foreground as well. So that's my effort. Oh, a little bit of, I forgot to mention, a little bit of light hitting the buildings on those rooftop villages as well. Maybe a little bit of a lean on that castle there on that side. So that's my painting. Let's go through the attendee paintings one by one in alphabetical order. So first up is Adele, and the paintings I've had, not everyone submitted their painting. If I have missed you out, then please let me know. I'll do a private little critique for you, but these are the paintings of those that submitted one to me. So first off Adele. And if you want to use or have a look at the source photo as a reference, then just open up this video again in another window or tab, and then just pause on the opening sequence where I show the source photo, rather than, I could place it on top of here, but it's going to take something away with the different sizes of images. So if you want to take a look at the source photo, then run the video again. Adele, thanks very much, Adele. We've certainly got the composition right, I think. Perhaps the mountain tops on the right-hand side, we could have a little bit more elevation in those buildings, and the feeling maybe a little bit more of a depth in the valley, with perhaps some steeper lines on that side, on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. But I really like the reds that you've got in there, that lovely sky as well. Nice wash of the sky, nice and bright. Vibrant greens, and you've kept the foreground deliberately simple. I like all these loose brush marks there. Very nice watercolor. Thanks very much, Adele. And Anna. Quite cool. Good composition. I like the shape of the background mountains. You don't have to really copy the photograph with the shape, the skyline of the mountains. It's up to reinterpretation. I think you can adjust that for sure to suit the composition. But yes, nice composition with those mountains. You've certainly got the depth right as well. Light values in the background. Might be a little bit confused here in the middle area. It might be a little bit difficult to see what's going on there. We've got certainly the pattern of those fields coming around, and I like the good, nice dark value there on the cliffs of that hillside village, and excellent trees, lovely trees. So well done, Anna. Barb, yeah, very atmospheric. Good range of values, lovely light hitting the fields in the valley. We've certainly got that feeling there. And also you notice those rocks and boulders in the foreground, a bit of light catching those as well. Excellent. Good dark hedges demarking the demarcation of those different field boundaries, and dry brush marks on the mountain ranges. Excellent, lovely. Well done, Barb. Barbara. Well, a slightly different technique with this one. We've got, perhaps we're making more of a feature of those villages, I think, in this one. We haven't got the elevation or the sense of a deep valley going out before us, but we've got the mountains in the distance. You've also got, looks like a little mountain path going up to that distant peak. Yes, very nice. Perhaps with this, some of the hedges might be just a little bit overworked, and I would say leave out some of these lighter marks as well. You might have perhaps been a bit overzealous with your white paint on some of these. Try and get the light of the paper to show through for some of those tops of the buildings. But a nice reinterpretation of the scene, Barbara. I like it. And nice composition, the nice way that you've got these horizontal bands of interest coming across and making a real feature of that, of those, the couple of villages there. Well done. And Beth, again, a different interpretation. This is quite light and soft. I like the way that you've done the right-hand side there with the light around the villages, making those stand out, and also these trees. Very nice trees there. This feeling of depth also going into the distance. Yeah, I like it. Perhaps we could have gone a little bit, I don't know whether your intention was to keep it soft, but perhaps we could have gone a little bit more, bit stronger with the greens towards the foreground, just so that that gives you the impression of the distant fields in the middle distance there being a little bit further away. But lovely scene. Thanks very much, Beth. Bev. Yeah, I like it. Again, different way of interpreting the scene. Lots of dry brush marks. Very nice greens in the middle. I like the different shades of green that you've got in there. That yellowy green is particularly striking, and also the little bits of light, the bits of few dabs of sparkles that you've got around the scene. Very nice. Perhaps with the hills, they could be a little bit lighter on the left-hand side. And also I would be careful with the sky, that mark there, sort of painting around the tops of those peaks. Perhaps consider that sky painting down above the skyline of the ridge, just so that we don't get that sort of white boundary around the skyline. But having said that, that sky is just right. I like the colours that you've got in this. Is it green or blue, and the little bits of white left there above the skyline, above the ridge of the mountains. Yeah, nice one. Thanks, Bev. And Bruno. Well, a very vibrant green here. Yeah, very nice. Perhaps a little bit too vibrant in that middle ground. It might be a bit difficult to see exactly. I like the way that you've done the nearby village. Perhaps the distant one, it's a little bit difficult to see what's going on there. But you've got the range of values. Lovely sky, nice sort of graded wash as well, a little bit darker at the top, lighter towards the horizon. But those distant mountains are excellent. You know, you've really got the feeling of the contour of the ranges there, and the different peaks, and a bit of a shadow on the right-hand side of those peaks, and a little like that blue that's crept into those middle olive green hedgerows. Yes, well done, Bruno. And Calvin. Typical Calvin style, quite plain and soft. This is Calvin's palette. Unfortunately, Calvin wasn't able on this one to get in his trademark lady with the long dress and the wide-brimmed hat. If you've seen Calvin's on previous workshops, you'll know what I mean. But I like it. I'm not sure about these dry brush marks here, but I really like the distant mountains. You've got a softer edge there, Calvin, bit of a hard edge on the right-hand side. So we've definitely pushed that left-hand side further back. And then we're just leaving it up to interpretation in the foreground with these mountains. Perhaps we could have had just a little bit more light. We've got the light of the fields there, Calvin, but perhaps just a little bit more light on the edges of these buildings, just where they're catching a bit of the sun, perhaps just to show them up a little bit more, give you a little bit of extra interest on that right-hand side, rather than being sort of quite dark and murky over there. But nice one, Calvin. Again, different way of interpreting the scene. Carol. Very abstract. I like this. This is excellent. I like the transparent layers, the bright colours and those transparent layers. Nothing's overworked. This is very good. Perhaps on the distance that might be a little bit too bright. We could have gone a little bit lighter there, Carol, on the mountain range. But My eyes keep coming to this side here. We've got the pattern of the hedgerows as well, radiating around. Yeah, so this area here is what I'm talking about. Almost a sort of fluorescent way that you've done that. Very bright, very, very striking. And in my opinion, nothing overworked. We have a little bit of a nice sort of cobalt blue or something like that at the bottom of those mountains, just making that a little bit cooler. Yes, nice transparency in this watercolor. Well done, Carol. And Ching. Well, we've got the composition right, nice balance. I'm not so sure about the shapes of the fields. They're a little bit too square, and maybe it's those little lines within the fields. I think if we had them more elongated, sort of as a shape, some of the fields a bit like that coming around, if you see what I mean, rather than these block shapes. And also these diagonal lines here, this area here might be a little bit, it looks like it's a large object somehow in front of it. It's sort of drawing my attention to that middle area, whereas this should be a little bit more subdued and pushed back a bit more. But having said that, I like the way that you've done the villages, and really excellent. I like the row of trees, this fringe of trees that are showing up bright against the dark background at the bottom of the right-hand village. Yes, you've got the light hitting the sides of the villages as well. Distant mountains, very, very good. Just the right value there, Ching. Very nice. Well done. Thanks so much, Ching. And Christy. Very bright fields. You can almost feel the light coming towards you with those fields. And you've got the impression of a lot more buildings and houses in those villages, which I think really works well. Perhaps the light on that village there might be a bit too many of those highlights showing through. Perhaps that could be less so and a little bit more solid on that left-hand side. Good mountains though, lovely sky, good mountains, dry brush marks, just giving the texture of some of the rocks coming down, the scree piles coming down the mountains, and different shades in those mountains, also cools and warms. Yes, good watercolor. Well done, Christy. And Dan. Well, it's a little bit darker, I guess, with this one, and a slightly different style. I quite like it, actually. You've moved the village on the right more into that center area, Dan, which I think works well from a composition point of view. Your style is, I think your style is using the dry brush quite a bit. Maybe we could have got a bit more light into some of those fields, perhaps using less of that dry brush sort of technique within those fields. Love the mountains, that sky, very nice. The way that you've got a little bit of a sort of yellowish ochre on that left-hand side. Then we're going to more intense blue on the right. Yeah, I really like those distant mountains, and the way that you've used a darker, maybe you've used a pen, or we're actually seeing a little bit of the pencil line showing through. So using quite a sort of weak wash over a majority of this painting, and letting perhaps some of that, if I can detect it right, down some of the darker marks showing through. You might have emphasized some of them as well. Yeah, very nice. Well done, Dan. Daniel. So Daniel, you've stretched yours out a little bit. We've got a wider dimension of paper size here. I think some of these marks are they stand out just a little bit too much. These marks on the mountain here, either they're too dark or the edges are just a little bit too hard. And also we've got quite, this horizontal line here might be just a little bit too perfect. Consider making that a little bit different, and also the where the village is on the right hand side, a different level, either lower or higher, presumably higher, to get the feeling of the elevation of those villages on the right hand side. Also, just be a bit careful not overdoing some of the excuse me, using the white paint there. Just ease off on that a little bit. Very nice with the greens there, nice shade of green, and you've got in the pattern of those fields as well. Yes, very nice. Perhaps with the foreground, use a bigger brush, Daniel, as well, so that the brush marks are a little bit larger in size, giving the feeling of those objects being a little bit closer to us. So less regimented with these marks. They're all sort of equally distant between each other. Just make it a bit more random, a little bit more messy. All right. Well done, Daniel. Thank you. And David C. No, just watch the watercolor paper there. I think you might have, I don't know whether it's your intention to paint on the, this is Saunders Waterford paper, but just be careful there. You might have painted on the inappropriate side of the paper, David, but it's a nice scene that you've got here. Nice composition, good pattern of fields. Perhaps with the fields, make the fields a little bit smaller, thinner in the distance, and a little bit wider coming towards us. That will give the impression of these middle fields being pushed back a little bit further. I do like the mountains in the background, like a previous painting. Just watch with some of these marks, not making them too dark and too harder edge, but that's the standout for me, those background mountains. And also the way that you did these little buildings here, or the larger castle on this right hand side, excellent. It really does stand out, that side of that tower facing towards the light. Great, well done, David. Thank you. And Diane. And it always looks nicer when you mount a painting. You've got that boundary around the outside. So thanks so much, Diane, for doing that. It's a softer one. I think with this one, we do have the feeling of the mountain in the distance being a lot higher. They certainly look a lot more impressive. You've gone for more of the soft edge approach, so soft edges of the fields predominantly, a little bit softer with the way that you've painted these two villages. And I think it really works. They're almost a very soft light. We've got the feeling of light, but that softness is very attractive. And then just a few little sparkles with some of that, might be white paint, I guess, just a very carefully, not overdone with the tops of those buildings. Yeah, very nice. But as you can see, as I'm going through these, there's so many different interpretations of the scene, and they all work in their own way. Well done, Diane and Eileen. Let me just see if I can zoom in on this one a bit. There we go. Right. Good composition. Nice mountains in the distance. I think with the villages, particularly that middle village there, I would not do this bottom. You've sort of used a small brush, I guess, to paint around the edges of those buildings. So just try and let the value and shape of those values say that this is a building. More that this nearby village and the cliff top, that's better in my opinion, but that one there, it just makes it stand out just a little bit too much, I think, that the way that you've done that one. The rest of it though, very nice. Lovely greens coming towards us. Just watch with some of these fields, try and use a bigger brush or larger shapes for some of the nearer objects, just to give them the feeling of being a little bit closer to you. And I don't know what I've said it, but I like those mountains. That's that sort of yellowish, that soft, light yellowish colour. Works really well. Thanks, Eileen. Thank you very much. And Engin. Now, Engin, you've moved your village more into the centre here. Very nice. Perhaps those fields are a little bit too blue, a little bit too cool. Could be a little bit greener there. The background hills, very good. Tiny bit of overworking, I think, on the right-hand side. They might be just a little bit too dark and a little bit overworked. But you've certainly got the feeling of the scene. Nice distant mountains, they're just the right value. They're perfect on that left-hand side. And the darker hedgerows as well. I like the foreground, very loose. And the pattern of these little edges or hedgerows there works really well to sort of lead the eye up into that village. And the way that you've done these castles, nice softness. We've got the feeling of the round turrets here of those that hilltop castle. Well done, Engin. Thank you. And we have Fauzia. Again, a different technique. And the sense of a range of mountains going out before us with some of these distant peaks. That one there, that one there. Very nice. I think the right-hand side, the village might be just a little bit overdone. So, and also try not to make the buildings too regular in size and shape. Try and change some of the buildings, make them a little bit higher, a little bit fatter, wider, and so on. I like the way that you've done the greens. We've certainly got the feeling of the distant greens being a little bit cooler and lighter. And maybe just a little bit overworked here in the foreground, Fauzia. I think, again, use a bigger brush in there and try and make it just a little bit looser, and also bring the colour down over the edge of the paper as well, just so we don't get that little thin boundary there. But I really like the way you did those mountains. They're excellent. Well done, Fauzia. Thank you. Next up, Fiona. Well, lovely light value of the distant mountains. Quite soft. You've gone quite dark on the edges of these hedges. I think that certainly gives the impression of the shape and the volume of those hedgerows works really well. Maybe that middle village there is a little bit confusing over what it is, but the nearby village is excellent. It really stands out, that darker. Maybe a little bit too dark, but you've got a very nice edge. I like this edge that you've got here, Fiona, of the edges of the foliage, the trees, the canopy of the trees, and the dark shadow behind it. That works really well. Could be a little bit more vibrant with the green of the nearby fields as well, just so that we've got that transition of a lighter green through to more vibrant green coming towards us. Nice one though, Fiona. Very nice indeed. Thank you. And Gisela. I think maybe Gisella's photo, I bet your painting is a lot brighter than this. Sometimes it happens with photographs. You take them and they're just a little bit, they turn out to be a bit darker than the actual real life painting. Now, okay, so you've got that village just move a little bit more to the middle. Perhaps we're lacking the elevation a little bit of the village. I like that castle there. It really stands out. And the feeling of light as I say, even though the photograph, I think, is a little bit dark on the right-hand side, I bet it's a lot brighter on that right-hand side. But the light hitting that central field, you've got the real feeling of light coming down there. Good value of those distant hills and nice sky as well. Tiny bit overworked, perhaps, Gisela, in the foreground. It was a bit difficult to see what was going on there in the bottom right-hand corner with boulders and scrub, and there weren't any sort of fields as such on that in that bottom right-hand corner. So just watch that little bit of overworking in that bottom right-hand corner. Well done, Gisela. Hands. So good values. Nice light distant hills pushing that back. What works well with yours hands are these two strong lines here in the foreground leading us up to the castle. I think that castle is really good, and that sort of line that you've got there of the tops of the buildings, that works. Maybe too many lighter marks, I think, in this bottom right-hand corner, and also at the bases of these hedges. I would say that one there. So we've got the row of the hedge, but then I wouldn't have that lighter patch before we've got the colour of the field. So take one to the other. Maybe make the hedgerow come down to that field, or if you're painting in the field, take it up, take the field, the darker field colour, up to the edge of the bottom of the hedgerow. Nice one, Hans, thank you. And Isabel. We've got the feeling of a bit of a gradient, I think, with this one. It almost looks like there's a bit of a hill here, which doesn't matter, and it works really well. Could have gone a bit more vibrant in the foreground here, just to make that a little bit closer, but everything else works well. Nice. You've got quite a rocky skyline to your distant mountains. Then coming towards us, yes, we've got the fields. In that middle area, I think there might be too many of these little lighter areas showing through. So maybe just try and make that a little bit more solid when you're painting that, just so that we don't get so many little hard shapes appearing through. I like the way that you've done the villages, particularly this right-hand village there is excellent. Yes, bit of light hitting that side, and the actual shapes of that light as well. Little bits of the paper unpainted just around those edges, just adds in that extra bit of sparkle. Yeah, so it just needs a bit, I think, a little bit more vibrant in that foreground there. Thanks, Isabel. John D. Nice and soft. Certainly, you've gone quite soft, John, with those distant hills. That works for me. Nice texture as well. Also, the strong pattern of the fields. You've made them a little bit more well spaced out. So that pattern that you've got there works really well. I would say the villages on the right side, very good. It's a little bit difficult to see in this bottom right-hand corner what's going on there. I perhaps would use maybe a bigger brush and go for larger shapes as well. And with these trees, make there might be just a little bit, yes, it might be just a little bit overworked in that bottom right-hand corner. But everything else works for me. I particularly like the shape of the fields that you've got and those background mountains. Well done, John. Another John, John Q. So this is quite cool, I'd say. There's like cool reds, cool greens. Again, like the previous John, you've got very good shapes of those fields. There, there, there. That sort of pattern that I pointed out. I like the way that you've done the rocks here in the foreground on the right hand side, and the trees there just in front of the shadows. Be careful with not overusing some of the white paint. And maybe with the hills, these darker marks that you've made, these ridges, they might be just a little bit too dark, and the edges just a little bit too hard, and it doesn't. Maybe if we imagine these two lines weren't there, right, that one there and that one there, would that give the feeling of pushing that mountain back a bit further? That's what we're trying to do, is get the impression of depth. I think even on mine, I might have gone a little bit too rich with my colours, and I could have gone a bit lighter by pushing it back. So just be careful with some of the darker marks there on the distant mountains. You get away with it on the nearer ones there to some extent. Yeah, nice one, John. Thank you. Joy. Well, a nice soft feeling to this one. Certainly got the feeling of the depth, the distant mountains, nice wash of the sky. As we come towards us, I would have gone a bit richer, more vibrant with the greens. They're still a little bit quite cool here in the bottom right-hand corner, Joy. But I really like the way that you've done these the shapes of different trees and hedges. It's very effective. If I can pick out a few, like that one there, where you've dropped in, you've done a little bit of wet in wet. We've done the lighter green there, then you've gone in with that darker, thicker colour, while the paper is still quite damp, and you get those soft edges. And then this fringe of foreground trees as well. That works brilliantly. Yeah, well done, Joy. Thank you. And Carter. Yes, we've certainly got the feeling of light hitting these buildings on the right-hand side, and the little bits of rock as well on the cliff, on that village. The distant hills. I think we've got the base colour of the hills right, but maybe just a little bit too dark on these edges, a bit too hard for some of those distant hills there. But I actually quite like the pattern that you've got, Carter, of these lines. That one there, that one there. It's actually quite nice, that sort of lace-like lines that you've got through that line there. But yes, just maybe some of the edges might be a tiny bit too hard. Lovely greens though. The greens of these fields, brilliant. Not so sure about these little dots. Not sure what that is doing. But I guess you've got those dots repeated along the way. I mean, repetition is always a good thing in a painting. Repeating those little dart lines. Maybe it was maybe a little bit over enthusiastic with the splattering, but it's a nice painting, and certainly the feeling of light hitting that right hand side, bit of softness, softer light at the base of that soft edge. I can see there's a bit of splattering. Very effective. Well done, Carter. Nice one. Nice cools and warms in the distant hills also. Kazim. Yeah, I like it. I really like those background hills. Now Kazim's done these darker marks here, but not gone too dark, and they don't sort of stand out too much. It certainly still pushes those mountains back. Also, lovely way that you've done The trees and hedges, we've certainly got the feeling of the shape of those hedges and that connecting as well, like this row here. That row there is going up that way. We've done the background already, but that connecting there, do you see that? Let me zoom in. That same value, we're doing a little bit of connecting, works really well. Nice field shapes. Yes, good job on the villages also and these hedges. I think it's really nice. Tiny bit of use of the white paint there, but you haven't overdone it. And also a feeling of a little bit of a curvature and a slight rise in the gradient of these nearby fields. Kazim is brilliant. Well done. And Lynn. Yeah, now Lynn's gone more for the foreground. Push those villages back, play more on the foreground. The distant hills work really well. Just watch on the left-hand side. Tiny bit of overworking there. Not sure if you've gone over that a few times, Lynn. But on the whole, the distant hills really nice. And from a composition point of view, yes, we've got these sort of bands coming towards us. So a line there, a line there, a line there, a line there. That works quite well, coming down, these succession of bands coming down towards us. We haven't, I guess, gone for what I was going for, that radial pattern of hedges, which I thought was quite nice leading up to that village. But yours works equally well. And then right at the bottom of the painting, just a few little tops of the canopies of a few foreground trees, I think also works well to serve as a sort of boundary, a frame to that bottom corner. Well done, Lynn. And another Lynn. Nice pattern, those fields. I think the way that you've done, the background hills are really nice, but we've got, I think, in this area here, it almost looks like we're sinking down into a deeper part of the valley there. So maybe if in some way, if that was a little bit flatter there, that might serve just to prevent us feeling that there's a bit of a cliff in that distance. But everything else is brilliant. I like the pattern of the fields, the value of the greens as well, these brush marks. Towers over here could be a little bit bigger, but you've got that nice softness and the feeling of the roundness of the buildings on the tops of the cliffs. And these trees here, I love these trees, particularly these two here. They're really nice, Lynn, the way that you've just painted around those to create that shape. Nice, confident brush marks. This foreground field here, great shape to that. Look at that sort of wedge type shape. Again, helping the viewer go into the scene. Yeah, a good range of contrast. We've got lots of lights, lots of darks. Excellent. Well done, Lynn. Thank you. And Maddie. Very bright with those background hills, perhaps a little bit too bright on the left-hand side. And also I would ease off on this darker colour for the ridges. Just try and, it doesn't really need that. Just try and make that a little bit lighter. Also try and get in a little bit of light on some of the buildings, particularly on the rooftops, the flat rooftops. That would just help add a little bit of sparkle there. But nice greens that you've got on these fields and the pattern of those fields as well. With this tree here, on a comment I made on, I think it was Kazim's, trying to connect things as well. So not have that boundary around that tree. It's a lovely tree, but maybe consider that tree perhaps being a little bit larger and connecting with the hedgerow behind it. But nice greens as well. Lovely reds on that right-hand side. Very rich. Well done, Maddie. Thank you. And Nohung, hopefully I pronounced your name okay. I like these distant hills on the left-hand side and that little bit of light shadow on the right-hand side of those peaks. A bit of light in the valley just in front of it. Very effective. Nice greens as well. It's a little bit confusing with, on the right-hand side, it's a bit difficult to see the shapes of the buildings. It might be these lighter marks there. Perhaps if there was more of a sort of rectangular, squarish type shape to some of those, that would work a little bit better. And with some of these trees in the foreground, consider just a little bit of light shadow on the right-hand side just to give them a little bit more of a three-dimensional form. But the greens that you've got are brilliant, and also a little bit of red creeping into the scene, and the shapes of those fields. You haven't gone for those straight lines. You've got a bit of a kinky curve there, and a bit of a curve there, and that shape there. But very nice. I particularly like that area there. That works really well for me. Lovely. Well done. And hopefully I pronounced your name. And Enhung. I do apologise. I didn't do a good job on that. Nydia. Well, my eyes immediately go to this village here. Not sure about the transition of that. It's brilliant. It just really stands out, that village. I'm not sure about the transition to this green patch here, Nydia. Maybe if there was some sort of object. We want to try and push that up, and it's a little bit difficult to see how this village is lying in that valley. But you've got the valleys just right. Sky could be a little bit lighter, and maybe the mountain is just a tiny bit darker, perhaps. Maybe on the right-hand side, but on the left-hand side, just right. The value of the greens, excellent. I'm not sure what paper you've got here. I would say if you had some better quality paper, I bet this would turn out a little bit better. And just watch this little bit of overworking in the right-hand corner here also. But a nice pattern of the fields that you've got. And as I said, particularly like the way that you've done the buildings, and a pretty good job on the nearby village as well. But that one there, you really do feel the sense of all those different buildings in that village and the way they're sitting side by side, and no use of white paint as well, just to add the extra sparkle on top. Excellent, well done. Pablo, again, different. We've got a flatter valley here. No hard marks with the hedgerows. And what works really well is that softness. It's almost like there's a little bit of mist coming into those right-hand villages. We've got the feeling of the distance. I would say have some of the marks, have some of these darker marks maybe a little bit larger coming towards us. In the distance there, you've given the impression of those distant trees and hedgerows, but maybe coming towards us, perhaps have some larger trees just to fill in this gap here. Some larger trees standing on their own, and maybe a few darker hedgerows. I like this mark though. This row here works really well, and it's sort of repeated there. Maybe a little bit there. That again helps us take the eye, or that patch there. So we're going from there to there to there. A nice sort of succession of these shapes going into the distance. Well done, Pablo. And Phyllis. Now I bet Phyllis's photo, her painting is a little bit bright in this. It's a little bit dark on the right hand side. We've got good composition. The background hills maybe a tiny bit too dark on that left hand side, Phyllis, but I do like the texture that you've got into those background hills. Then coming into the middle ground, it's a little bit confusing where the hedgerows are, and these two lines aren't really doing much for me. Perhaps if they weren't there, or we had some stronger lines going across, that might strengthen and connect the different elements a little bit more. The buildings could be a little bit larger on the hilltops here, and perhaps just a little bit of light catching those as well, or some light just to show them a bit more clearly against a darker background, because it's quite dark there and quite dark here. But other than that, brilliant painting. I do like those the sky's brilliant, and those background hills and these peaks that you've got, very impressive. A lot of nice atmosphere there. Well done, Phyllis. Ravi B. So, nice, cool, distant mountains. Just be careful with the darker marks, Ravi, on the ridge of these mountains. Just try and have, if that was lighter there and then this right hand side was just a little bit darker, that would serve as the demarcation between the two. We've not got too clear where this right hand village is. We're a little bit lost in this area here in the middle where my cursor is floating around, but on the left hand side these fields are very, very good indeed. Perhaps a little bit too bright with that green, Ravi, in the middle distance, but the shape of these fields and the way that you've created the hedgerows as well, when I stand back and look at it from a distance, it works so well. Yeah, these patterns that you've got, then a bit of lost and found. There's a gap there, and the shape of those distant hedges as well. Well done, Ravi. Thank you. And another Ravi. Yeah, you've got the lightness of the distant hills. I like this sense of the valley here. That nice valley there, and that distant village, that works really well. You've got lots of nice colours in this. A bit of green on the distant hills, purples, a bit of burnt sienna on that ridge there as well. Almost a golden colour on that left hand side. I like the village on the right hand side. Nice bit of painting around these tree shapes. Not so sure about the shape here, Ravi. That mark there, and this mark, not so sure about that. But you've got those nice, like the other Ravi, nice shapes of the hedgerows as well leading into the village. That might be a little bit confused, that village there in the distance. Perhaps there's too many of these lighter marks showing through. It was a difficult village to portray, but the one on the right-hand side, very good. Well done, Ravi. And Sally. Well, this is nice and loose. Nice sky. Good value of the background hills. You've gone for a bit of a softer edge with these marks. Maybe a little bit too, not sure if some of them are a little bit overworked with the brush, but they are soft and it certainly pushes that back. The hedge, the fields, very good as well. We've got nice lights and darks coming forwards. I think the buildings are a little bit confused. Perhaps if there were some windows or some little verticals and little horizontals somewhere just to, excuse my red, but if there are little windows here and there, that might just make them stand out more as buildings, just a tiny bit more, or maybe more of them, because it looks like there's just a couple of buildings there and then these there. Nice way that you've cut around these 4 trees here in the foreground. Yeah, I do like those greens though. Very, very nice. Well done, Sally. Thank you. Sandy. Very colourful. We haven't got the feeling of the hilltops in the background. It looks quite level or not so high. But lovely colours, and also what I like in paintings when I try to do are these horizontal bands. So, you know, we've got the sky, then the mountains, and then a middle row of trees, the distant trees, and then we're coming brighter as we come down towards us. Lovely. And also the way that you've done here, again, the transparency, like a previous painting, was very colourful, very transparent. That there would make a nice painting all of its own, just cropped, just zoomed in there. Look at that yellow, the warm against the cool, the way that you've done this. You haven't gone for those circular towers, more of a squarish tower, but nothing overworked. Nice transparency, beautiful. So that bottom right corner, brilliant. Well done, Sandy. And Sarah, maybe we've gone over a couple of, oh, maybe this is done in a sketchbook here. I think it's really nice. This is excellent. I guess it's the pattern of these peaks here, and these almost like pine trees, the sort of conical pine trees with a bit of a peak at the top. It's a nice sort of pattern that you've got there, but lovely colour of those distant hills, coming richer, redder towards the right-hand side. Lovely hilltop village as well. And the way that you've done the foreground, we've got the pattern of the fields, we've got the connection as well of these different hedgerows as they come towards us, and little boulders here catching the light or being lit up with that little bit of shadow beyond them. Yes, very nice shadow, Sarah. I always in mind, you do a lovely painting, but it's sort of, to me, this is just my own opinion, but it's offset by that the middle of the book, your middle of your sketching pad there. But very nice, well done. And Sheila. Well, my eyes, well, a couple of things really stand out. The light hitting the village here. It might not look too Moroccan. It might have also a little bit of a slope. Perhaps the photograph, not sure when you took the how you took the photograph, there's a little bit of a slant on it, but there's a slight lean to some of these buildings, but a different sort of architecture that you've got with those buildings. But it works really well. These sort of strong rectangular shapes that you've got in the buildings and the cliffs that you've got there supporting them, and that sense of light as well, hitting the gap between the distant village and the nearby village, and the mountains. That value that you've got there on that distant hill pushes it way back. Brilliant. And then, yeah, I suppose that works for me. This row of foliage across the bottom of the page might be a little bit overworked with the foliage on the right-hand side here, just a tiny bit, but elsewhere, very nice. I like the trees. Perhaps some of these trees might be a little bit too large for the size of the buildings, and we've got although I really do like that light hitting these buildings, perhaps if we elevated them a bit more, made them feel as if they're a little bit higher up, that would work really well with that distant village. This nearby one is very nice. Yeah, like the way the mountains, the way that you've got them richer, warmer, coming towards us, nice and soft, no hard dark marks in there. And let's just zoom into that village. Look at that lovely, cool shadow on this side as well. You haven't gone too dark, like I and a few others went quite dark. You've kept it a little bit lighter, and that really works. You don't necessarily need that lighter trees in front of it. Well done, Sheila. And another Sheila. Very cool with this one. Could be a little bit brighter with the green, Sheila. A bit more, perhaps a bit more yellow, a bit more warmth in it. Okay, just to make it a little bit brighter, and also try not to have too dark a colour on these ridges in the background. But very nice sky, just the right value of those distant hills as well. The hedgerows, nice cool greens, creating those, and quite a nice, very nice sort of atmospheric lining that you've got to the edges of these buildings coming up. Yeah, it's a nice shape there that you've got there on that right-hand side. Not so sure about this distant village here, particularly the bottom edge. Perhaps if that was made softer, it looks like a almost like a sort of platform or something that those might be on. So maybe if it was less dark, or perhaps just that light line there, just make a smoother transition from one to the other to make it connect more to the ground. I like that middle village though. Nice bit of light hitting that village and nice dry brush marks. Yeah, well done, Sheila. Thank you. And Shiva Kumar. Yeah, so good value of those hills, pushes them back. Maybe the pattern of these fields, they need to be a little bit thinner and narrower in the distance so that it sort of pushes them back a little bit more. And there's a tiny bit of a lean on some of these buildings. But you've got the good shape of those fields though. It would be nicer if they were a little bit narrower. I think maybe we've taken the field too far up into the sea. Maybe if they were in that middle area there. So that hill comes down, and then we're starting the fields here, and then we come down and we've got the hedgerows. That might work a little bit more. Also try and get the feeling of the elevation of these villages also. We've sort of got it here with the nearby village, but maybe not so much with the distant village. Nice greens. We've got that richer green coming towards us, literally slapped in a little bit of red just to make it a bit more interesting. Well done, Shivakuma. Thank you. And Susan. Very colourful. I like this middle area here. And the brush marks that you've made as well. Very confident little brush marks. Yeah. Now that dark mark there actually works. The way that you've got that very, very dark on the outer limit of the edge of the skyline of the ridge of those rocks works really well there. A bit of red there. Red, cool. Very nice mountains. Perhaps a little bit confusing in that middle area there where the hedges and fields are, but then coming towards us, I do like it. The shapes of these trees here, excellent. Little bit of light showing through, cool on the right-hand side. Lovely village there, nice and cool, those blues, bit of cutting around. Perhaps a bit too many sparkles, or the paper showing through, could be painted over, but a nice loose painting. I particularly like the way that you did the ridge though of those background hills. Well done, Susan. And Tom. Now you've actually changed the light here. You've got the light coming towards us, which is very effective. I took everyone down the path of the light from the left, but you've got the light coming towards us, and that makes it much more atmospheric. Particularly, the way that you've done it, Tom, I can see, is creating this bit of shadow there, and the shadow there, the hedgerows. And then obviously these shadows get a little bit larger, a little bit longer coming towards us. So this may be, oh, there's another shadow there. So this may be slightly later in the day, and the lights, the sun's gone around, it's coming more towards us from the west. Very nice. And then we've got the opportunity to silhouette, make these villages, these hilltop villages, stand out more. Also like these strong lines here. You haven't gone too hard on those lines. Maybe it could be a little bit lighter in the distance, and I would say try and avoid going over those mountains a couple of times. You've done that there. Maybe the value that you did first of all might have been all right. Yeah, well done, Tom. And Tony? Well, we have the feeling of a flatter landscape here, I think, particularly in the valley. Good composition though. Nice background hills, lovely sky. You've got more of the sky in yours. Not so sure about these marks that you've done there across that ridge. Perhaps if they were more connected or not so dark, that might work a little bit better. But nice texture that you got into those hills. Good greens, perhaps with the fields, they could be a little bit brighter as they come towards us. Quite a sharp value difference, contrast between the darkness of some of those trees. Although perhaps they could be just a little bit lighter compared to the shade of green that you've got in the fields. I like these villages on the right-hand side. We've certainly got the form of those villages as well. Just watch the perspective on that building, perhaps a little bit, as we're looking down on those buildings. And you've sneaked in a few windows also. I would ease off on some of the windows in that middle one. But lovely the way that you've done the nearby village on the right-hand side. Perhaps we could have a few more highlighted trees in the foreground there, but you've got a really nice pattern going on here with those fields, and those distant mountains are very, very good. Yep, so well done, Tony. Well, thanks again, everyone that took part in the October 2021 Tim Wilmot workshop, Morocco. December the 11th is the next workshop, and this is our source photo. Let me just zoom in here. This is Porthgain in West Wales in the UK, a fishing harbour scene. And we've got looks like a couple of main boats there. Where would you place a third boat? But it's going to be a great opportunity to use lots of different watercolour techniques. Good, we've got lots of contrast here, the dark shadows, the light hitting that, the side of the building there as well. We've also got a couple of figures, we've got reflections, we've got all sorts going on here. The soft horizon as well, different colours, the reds, the yellows, the lichen, the blues, that blue side of the building there. So lovely scene to contemplate for our next watercolour workshop. The joining instructions or registration will be in the video notes, so just look down in the description. Love to see you. But thanks very much, everyone that took part in the October workshop, and catch up with you on the next workshop and in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.